The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 1878, and Emma Sullivan knew, before opening it, that some distant relative had died and left her enough money to make her life considerably more complicated. She stood on the dusty main street of Sheridan, Wyoming, holding the sealed envelope while the morning sun climbed higher over the Bighorn Mountains, and seriously considered throwing it into the nearest horse trough. Instead, she tucked it into her apron pocket and finished her walk to the general store, where she worked 6 days a week for honest wages that kept her fed, clothed, and blessedly independent. The store smelled of coffee beans and leather when she pushed through the door. Her employer, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had outlasted 3 husbands and now ran the most profitable business in town, looked up from the ledger she was balancing. "You look like someone just handed you a rattlesnake," Mrs. Chen observed, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Close enough," Emma replied, pulling out the telegram and finally breaking the seal. She read it quickly, then read it again more slowly to make sure she understood. Her great-aunt Beatrice, a woman she had met exactly twice in her 22 years, had passed away in Philadelphia and left Emma her entire estate. The lawyer's estimate of its value made Emma's hands shake slightly. "Well," Mrs. Chen prompted. "I am apparently now a woman of considerable means," Emma said, sinking onto the stool behind the counter. $20,000, a house in Philadelphia, and various investments." Mrs. Chen whistled low. "That is trouble." Emma could not have agreed more. She had come to Sheridan 3 years ago with nothing but a carpet bag and a determination never to depend on anyone again. Her father had gambled away the family farm when she was 17. Her mother had died of shame and pneumonia that same winter. Emma had worked as a seamstress, then a laundress, saving every penny until she could afford the train ticket west. She had built a life here on her own terms, answerable to no one, and she liked it that way. The trouble started exactly 4 days later, when the news of her inheritance spread through Sheridan like wildfire through dry grass. Emma had made the mistake of depositing a bank draft at the town's only bank, and the banker, Mr. Thornton, apparently had a loose tongue when it came to discussing the financial situations of young single women. The first proposal came from Gerald Masterson, who owned the largest ranch within 50 miles of Sheridan. He was 43 years old, had buried 2 wives already, and smelled perpetually of cigars and self-satisfaction. He cornered Emma outside the church on Sunday, hat in hand, and asked for her hand in marriage with all the romantic enthusiasm of a man negotiating a cattle purchase. "Miss Sullivan, I understand you have come into some money," he began, which was already a terrible start. "A woman alone cannot properly manage such assets. I am prepared to offer you the security of my name and the comfort of my home. You would want for nothing." Emma looked at him steadily. "Mr. Masterson, I want for nothing now. I thank you for your offer, but I must decline." His face reddened. "You would be foolish to refuse. A woman of your age and circumstances should be grateful for such an opportunity." "Then I suppose I am foolish," Emma said pleasantly. "Good day, Mr. Masterson." The second proposal came 2 days later from Bernard Whitmore, the town's lawyer. He was younger than Masterson, perhaps 30, and had the kind of polished charm that made Emma immediately suspicious. He invited her to dinner at the hotel restaurant and spent the entire meal discussing her inheritance with disturbing specificity. "You need someone to help you make wise decisions," he said over dessert. "The frontier is full of unscrupulous men who would take advantage of a woman in your position. As my wife, your assets would be protected, and you would have the benefit of my legal expertise." "And what would you have the benefit of?" Emma asked. Bernard smiled. A beautiful wife and the satisfaction of knowing I had helped preserve her fortune. How noble, Emma said dryly. Mr. Whitmore, I have no intention of marrying anyone, but if I did, it would not be because I needed someone to protect my money from unscrupulous men. I am perfectly capable of identifying those myself. The third, fourth, and fifth proposals all followed similar patterns. Men she had never spoken to suddenly discovered urgent reasons to seek her hand in marriage. Each one couched their interest in terms of protection, guidance, or duty. Not one of them asked what she wanted. Not one of them seemed to consider that she might be content as she was. Emma refused them all with varying degrees of politeness, depending on how insulting their proposals were. By the end of April, she had turned down 9 men and earned a reputation around town for being proud, difficult, and ungrateful for the opportunities being presented to her. "Let them talk," Mrs. Chen said when Emma complained about the whispers that followed her through town. They would talk anyway, better to be talked about for having standards than for lacking them. It was early May when Emma first really noticed Phillip Hayes. Of course, she had seen him around town before. Sheridan was small enough that everyone knew everyone by sight if not by name. But he was a working cowboy, one of the ranch hands who rode in occasionally for supplies, and their paths had never crossed in any meaningful way. He came into the general store on a Thursday afternoon, dusty from the trail, and asked Mrs. Chen for tobacco, coffee, and matches. Emma was in the back, unpacking a shipment of fabric, but she could hear the conversation clearly. "How is the spring roundup going?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Well enough," Philip replied. His voice was quiet, steady. "Lost a few calves to a mountain lion, but we tracked her back to her den. She had cubs, so we left her alone and moved the herd." "Not many ranchers would do that," Mrs. Chen observed. "Not many ranchers have to do the actual tracking," Philip said, and there was a hint of humor in his tone. "Easy to order something killed when you do not have to look it in the eye and see it is just trying to feed its young." Emma found herself listening more carefully. She finished with the fabric and came out to the front of the store. Philip was counting out coins on the counter, exact change. He was tall, probably close to 6 feet, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that needed cutting. His clothes were worn but clean, and his hands had the calluses of someone who made his living with rope and reins. He glanced up when Emma approached, and she noticed his eyes were an unusual gray-blue, like a stormy sky. He nodded politely. "Miss." "Mr. Hayes," Emma replied, suddenly aware that she knew his name, which meant she had been more observant of him than she had realized. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise maybe that she knew who he was, but he just collected his purchases and touched the brim of his hat. "Ladies." After he left, Mrs. Chen gave Emma a knowing look. "What?" Emma asked. "Nothing," Mrs. Chen said, but she was smiling. Emma tried not to think about Phillip Hayes, but it proved difficult. He had a quiet competence that she found herself comparing to the loud, presumptuous confidence of her various suitors. She wondered what ranch he worked for, how long he had been in Wyoming, whether he had family somewhere. She got some of her answers 2 weeks later when the 6th proposal arrived, this one from Clayton Morrison, who owned the second-largest ranch in the area and employed about 20 cowboys, including, Emma learned, Phillip Hayes. Clayton Morrison was everything Emma had learned to dislike in the weeks since her inheritance became public knowledge. He was rich, arrogant, and utterly convinced that his wealth entitled him to whatever he wanted. He did not ask Emma to dinner. He simply appeared at the general store one afternoon, announced that he intended to marry her, and seemed genuinely shocked when she refused. "I am offering you a position that any woman in this territory would envy," he said, his voice rising. You would be mistress of the largest house in Sheridan, with servants, fine clothes, everything you could want. Except freedom, Emma replied. Mr. Morrison, I do not love you. I do not even particularly like you. Why would I marry you? Love. He said the word like it was something distasteful. Marriage is a practical arrangement, Miss Sullivan. Love is for storybooks and fools. Then I suppose I am a fool, Emma said, because I will not marry without it. Clayton's face darkened. You are making a mistake. A woman in your position cannot afford to be so choosy. Mr. Morrison, I am in a position to be exactly as choosy as I please. That is rather the point of having my own money. He left in a fury, and Emma thought that would be the end of it. She was wrong. 3 days later, Mrs. Chen mentioned that Clayton had been making remarks around town about Emma's character, suggesting that she was accepting money from men in exchange for favors, that her inheritance was probably fabricated, that she was trying to trap a wealthy husband by playing hard to get. Emma was furious but not surprised. She had learned young that some men could not tolerate being told no by a woman. She held her head high and ignored the whispers, trusting that anyone with sense would see Clayton's rumors for what they were. What she did not expect was for Phillip Hayes to get involved. She heard about it from old Tom Watson, who drove the supply wagon between Sheridan and the outlying ranches. He came into the store grinning like a cat with cream. You should have seen it, Miss Emma, he said. Clayton was holding forth at the saloon last night, saying all kinds of nasty things about you. Most folks were just ignoring him, but young Hayes was sitting in the corner, getting quieter and quieter. Finally, Clayton said something real crude, and Hayes stood up and told him to shut his mouth. Emma's heart did something complicated. What happened? Clayton laughed at him. Said Hayes was just another saddle tramp who did not know his place. Said if Hayes had something to say, they could settle it outside. Tom shook his head, but Hayes did not take the bait. Just looked Clayton dead in the eye and said, I am saying you are a liar and a coward. Miss Sullivan has done nothing to deserve your slander, and any man with decency would be ashamed to speak about a woman the way you do. Then he finished his drink and walked out. Did Clayton follow him? Emma asked. Nope. He blustered a bit, but I think he knew if he actually fought Hayes, he would lose. Hayes might not have money, but he is young and strong and has that look about him of a man who has done hard things. Clayton is soft under all that bluster. Tom chuckled. Anyway, after that, the saloon went real quiet and Clayton left not long after. Have not heard him spreading rumors since. Emma felt warmth spread through her chest. She had defended herself successfully for weeks, but there was something deeply touching about knowing that Phillip Hayes had spoken up for her without being asked, without expecting anything in return. That was kind of him, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Tom gave her a sly look. Hayes is a good man. Quiet but good. Been working for Morrison for about 2 years, does his work and keeps to himself mostly. Emma wanted to ask more questions but restrained herself. Still, for the rest of the day, she found her thoughts drifting back to Phillip Hayes and his quiet defense of her reputation. She did not have to wait long to thank him. He came into the store the following Saturday, and this time Emma made sure she was the one who helped him. Mr. Hayes, she said as he approached the counter, I understand I owe you my thanks. He looked confused for a moment, then understanding crossed his face and he shook his head. No thanks necessary, Miss Sullivan. Clayton was out of line. Nevertheless, it was kind of you to speak up. Most people would have stayed silent. Phillip met her eyes and she was struck again by the steadiness in his gaze. Most people should speak up more often when they see something wrong. The world might be a better place. Emma found herself smiling. Perhaps so. What can I help you with today? Just need some salt and sugar, he said, then hesitated. And I am wondering if you have any books. Emma's interest sharpened. We have a small selection. What are you looking for? Anything, really? I finished the last one I had, and the evenings are long. Emma led him to the small shelf where Mrs. Chen kept a rotating stock of books. It was not much, maybe 15 volumes, but it was more than most general stores carried. Philip examined the titles carefully, running his finger along the spines. "Have you read this one?" he asked, pulling out a copy of Ivanhoe. "Twice," Emma admitted. "It is wonderful if you like adventures and romance." "I am not sure I know much about romance," Philip said, "but I like a good story." Emma found herself enjoying the conversation. "There is plenty of adventure, then." "Knights and tournaments and sword fights." Philip smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "Sounds like a pleasant change from mending fences and chasing cattle." He bought the book along with his supplies, and as Emma wrapped them, she found herself hoping he would come back to the store soon. It was a dangerous hope, she knew. She had sworn off men, especially after the parade of mercenary proposals she had endured. But there was something different about Phillip Hayes. He had not asked her for anything. He had not tried to impress her with his prospects or convince her that she needed him. He had simply been kind because it was the right thing to do. Over the next few weeks, Philip became a regular visitor to the general store. He always needed something: supplies for the ranch, tobacco, another book. Emma began to suspect that he was making excuses to come to town more often, and the thought made her heart flutter in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. They talked about books mostly. Philip was surprisingly well-read for a cowboy. He had grown up in Kansas, he told her, on a small farm. His mother had been a schoolteacher before she married, and she had made sure all her children could read and write and think for themselves. "She died when I was 16, Philip said one afternoon. They were sitting on the bench outside the general store, taking advantage of a brief lull in customers. "Fever took her in the space of a week. My father followed her 6 months later. I think he died of a broken heart as much as anything." "I am sorry," Emma said softly. "My mother died when I was 17. My father lost our farm not long after. He is still alive, as far as I know, somewhere back east, but we do not speak." Philip looked at her with understanding. "It is hard being on your own." "It is," Emma agreed, "but it is also freedom. No one can take from me what I have built for myself." "Is that why you have been refusing all those proposals?" Philip asked, then looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that is not my business." "It is all right," Emma said. "The whole town seems to think my personal life is public property anyway." She sighed. "But yes, that is part of it. Every man who has proposed to me has talked about my money, my need for protection, the security they can offer. Not one of them has asked what I want or what I dream about or what makes me happy." "What do you want?" Philip asked quietly. Emma turned to look at him, surprised by the directness of the question. "I want to be seen as a person, not as property or a prize. I want someone who values my mind as much as my inheritance. I want a partner, not a keeper." She paused, then added more softly, "And I want to be loved for myself." Philip nodded slowly. "That does not seem like too much to ask." "You would be surprised," Emma said dryly. "I do not think I would," Philip replied. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I tell you something honestly, Miss Sullivan?" "I wish you would call me Emma," she said. "And yes, please." "Emma, then." He took a breath. "I think you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. You are smart and strong, and you do not let anyone push you around. You work hard, you are kind to people who deserve it and firm with people who do not, and you read Walter Scott for pleasure." He smiled slightly. "I have been coming to town more than I need to because I enjoy talking to you. I think I started falling for you the first time I heard you tell Clayton Morrison that you would not marry without love." Emma's heart was pounding. "You were there for that." I was in the back of the store, picking up an order for the ranch. You probably did not see me." Phillip turned to face her more fully. "I am not going to propose to you, Emma. I have nothing to offer you but a cowboy's wages and a rented room above a stable. You deserve better than that. But I wanted you to know that there is at least one man in this territory who admires you for all the right reasons." Emma felt tears prickling her eyes. "Phillip, can I tell you something honestly, please? I do not care about money. I never asked for that inheritance, and while I am grateful for the security it provides, it has brought me nothing but trouble. What I care about is honesty, kindness, someone who sees me as an equal." She reached out and took his hand, feeling calluses rough against her palm. "Everything you just said, that is worth more to me than all the ranches and fancy houses in Wyoming." Phillip looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. "Emma, I do not want you to think I am like those other men, trying to court you for what you have." "You are nothing like those other men," Emma said firmly. "You defended my honor expecting nothing in return. You have been coming to see me for weeks and never once mentioned my inheritance. You asked me what I wanted. Do you know how powerful that is, to be asked what I want?" "What do you want, Emma?" Phillip asked again, and this time the question felt weighted with possibility. "I want you to court me properly," Emma said. "I want to spend time with you and learn everything about you. I want to see if this feeling I have when I am around you is real and lasting. And I want you to promise me that you will always be honest with me, even when it is hard." Phillip squeezed her hand gently. "I can promise you that. Honesty is about the only thing I have in abundance." Emma laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Then we are starting with a solid foundation." Their courtship began slowly, carefully, like two people who had both been burned before and were determined not to make the same mistakes. Phillip would ride into town on his days off, and they would walk together, sometimes talking, sometimes just enjoying each other's company. He told her about his childhood in Kansas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his mother's patience with his questions, and his father's quiet strength. Emma told him about growing up in Ohio, about her father's descent into gambling and drink after her mother died, about the shame of losing everything and the determination to build a life where she would never be helpless again. "I think that is why I fought so hard against all those proposals," she admitted one evening. They were sitting by the creek that ran along the edge of town, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "It felt like being helpless again, having all these men think they could just claim me because I had money, like I was back to being property instead of a person." Phillip nodded. "I can understand that. I have never had much, but what I have I earned with my own hands. There is a pride in that." "Yes," Emma said, grateful that he understood. "Exactly that." As spring turned to summer, their feelings deepened. Emma found herself thinking about Phillip constantly, missing him when he was away at the ranch, feeling her heart lift whenever she saw him riding into town. He brought her wildflowers once, a simple bouquet of prairie roses and Indian paintbrush, and she treasured them more than if he had bought her diamonds. The town watched their courtship with interest. Some people approved, seeing the obvious affection between them. Others, particularly those who had proposed to Emma and been rejected, muttered about her making a poor choice, throwing herself away on a cowboy with no prospects. Emma did not care. For the first time in her life she was in love, truly in love, and it felt like flying. But not everyone was happy about the relationship. Clayton Morrison had not forgotten Emma's rejection or Phillip's defense of her honor. He began making life difficult for Phillip at the ranch, assigning him the worst jobs, the most dangerous horses, the longest hours. Phillip endured it without complaint, but Emma could see the strain wearing on him. "You should quit," she told him one evening. "Find work at another ranch." Phillip shook his head. "Morrison wants me to quit. That is why he is pushing so hard. If I leave, he wins, and I am not about to give him that satisfaction." "But what if he does something worse?" Emma worried. "What if he tries to hurt you?" "He will not," Phillip said with certainty. "Morrison is a bully, but he is also a coward. As long as I do my work and do not give him cause to fire me, he cannot touch me." Emma was not so sure, but she trusted Phillip's judgment. Still, she worried, and her worry proved justified when Clayton made his final move. It was late July when Clayton came to the general store. Emma was alone, Mrs. Chen having gone to visit her daughter in Buffalo for a few days. Clayton did not waste time with pleasantries. "I am prepared to make you a final offer, Miss Sullivan," he said. "Marry me, and I will make Phillip Hayes my foreman. He will have a good salary, a house of his own, security for life. Refuse me, and I will fire him today and make sure no other ranch in the territory will hire him." Emma felt anger rise in her throat like bile. "You cannot do that." "I can and I will," Clayton said coldly. "I am a powerful man, Emma. I own half this town and have connections throughout Wyoming. One word from me, and Hayes will never work as a cowboy again." "And you think I would marry you under those circumstances?" Emma asked incredulously. "You think blackmail will win my hand?" "I think you care about Hayes more than you care about your pride," Clayton said. "Prove it. Marry me, secure his future. It is a small sacrifice for someone you love." Emma looked at Clayton Morrison and saw him clearly, perhaps for the first time. He was not just arrogant or entitled. He was fundamentally broken in some way, unable to conceive of love as anything other than ownership, unable to understand why anyone would choose honest poverty over dishonest wealth. "No," she said clearly. "I will not marry you, not to save Phillip's job, not to save his life, not for any reason. Because Phillip would not want me to, and because the kind of man who would use such tactics is the last man on earth I would ever bind myself to." Clayton's face went red. "You will regret this." "The only thing I regret is wasting my breath talking to you," Emma replied. "Now get out of my store." Clayton left, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Emma sank onto the stool behind the counter, her hands shaking with anger and fear. She needed to warn Phillip, but he was out with the herd and would not be back in town for days. As it turned out, she did not need to warn him. Phillip came riding into town that very evening, his few possessions tied behind his saddle. "Morrison fired me," he said when Emma ran out to meet him. "Said I was not pulling my weight, but we both know the real reason." He looked worried but not defeated. "Emma, I am sorry. I know this complicates things." Emma laughed, surprising both of them. "Phillip, he came here today and tried to blackmail me into marrying him. He said if I refused, he would fire you and ruin your reputation. I told him to go to hell." Phillip's eyes widened. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Emma said firmly. "I will not be manipulated, and I will not let him think he can control either of us." She took his hands. "We will figure this out together," and they did. It turned out that Clayton Morrison's influence, while real, was not as absolute as he believed. Phillip found work within a week at a smaller ranch south of Sheridan, owned by a man named Samuel Porter who had no love for Clayton and no patience for his political games. The new job paid less and required Phillip to live in the bunkhouse with the other hands, but he was happy there. Samuel was a fair boss who valued hard work and honesty, and Phillip thrived under his leadership. Emma and Phillip's courtship continued through the summer and into the fall. They talked about the future, about what they wanted from life. Phillip admitted that while he enjoyed cowboy work, his real dream was to have his own small ranch someday, nothing fancy, just enough land for a modest herd and a garden. I would want a wife who was a true partner, he said. Someone who could work beside me, make decisions with me. Not someone to keep in the house like a decoration. Emma smiled. That sounds perfect to me. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Philip finally asked the question Emma had been waiting for. They were riding together in the foothills, enjoying one of the last warm days before winter set in. Philip pulled his horse to a stop near a small grove of aspen trees and helped Emma dismount. "I have something I want to ask you," he said, and Emma's heart began to race. "But first, I need to be completely honest with you about my situation." "All right," Emma said, though she wanted to tell him that his situation did not matter, that she had already made up her mind. "I have saved almost every penny I have earned for the past 6 years," Philip said. "I have $800 in the bank. It is not much, but combined with what I can earn over the next year or two, it might be enough to buy a small piece of land and start building a life." He took a breath. "But it will be hard, Emma. I cannot offer you comfort or luxury. If you marry me, you will be a rancher's wife, which means hard work and uncertainty and probably more struggle than you have known." "Are you finished?" Emma asked. Philip blinked. "I suppose so." "Good, because it is my turn to be honest," Emma said. "I have $20,000 in the bank. With that money, we could buy a ranch tomorrow, stock it with cattle, build a proper house, and still have plenty left over for whatever the future brings. But I need to know that you can accept that, Philip. I need to know that my having money will not make you feel less of a man or change the way you see me." Philip was quiet for a long moment. "I will not lie and say it is not hard for my pride," he finally said. "I was raised to believe a man should provide for his family. But I was also raised to believe that marriage is a partnership. If you are willing to share your life with me, I would be a fool to refuse to share your resources." He smiled slightly. "Besides, you are the one who earned that inheritance, not me. It is your money to do with as you please." "What pleases me is to build a life with you," Emma said. "A real partnership, like you said. Your $800 and my $20,000 pooled together to create something that belongs to both of us." Philip reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I bought this 2 months ago," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small emerald stone. "It is not fancy, but the jeweler said the emerald matched your eyes, and I thought that was fitting." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "It is perfect. Emma Sullivan, will you marry me?" Philip asked. "Not because I can offer you security or wealth or status, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Because I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy and building a future together." "Yes," Emma said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." Philip slipped the ring onto her finger and then he kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Emma felt like her heart might burst with joy. They were married in October, in the small church in Sheridan with Mrs. Chen and Samuel Porter standing as witnesses. Emma wore a simple green dress that she had made herself, and Philip wore his best suit, carefully brushed and pressed. The ceremony was short and heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Emma felt like every difficult thing she had endured had been worth it to arrive at this moment. The town gave them a small reception at the hotel, and even some of Emma's former suitors attended, though Emma noticed Clayton Morrison was conspicuously absent. She did not care. This day was about celebrating the future, not dwelling on the past. After the reception, Emma and Philip rode out to look at the property they had purchased the week before. It was 200 acres of good grazing land about 10 miles from Sheridan, with a creek running through it and a small cabin that needed work but was structurally sound. They had already started making plans for expanding the cabin into a proper house, and building a barn for the horses and cattle they would buy in the spring. "What should we call it?" Emma asked as they stood together watching the sunset over their land. Phillip thought for a moment. "How about the Double H Ranch? For Hayes and honesty." Emma laughed. "I love it. The Double H Ranch it is." They spent their first night as a married couple in the small cabin, wrapped in blankets against the October chill. Phillip built up the fire while Emma unpacked the supplies they had brought. It was not fancy or comfortable, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. "Are you happy?" Phillip asked as they settled in for the night. Emma looked around at the rough wooden walls, the crackling fire, the man she loved. "I am happier than I ever thought I could be," she said honestly. "This is exactly what I wanted, a partner, a purpose, a place to build a life." "You are everything I wanted," Phillip said, pulling her close. "I promise I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret choosing honesty," Emma said, kissing him softly. "That was what I was waiting for all along. Someone who would be honest with me, even when it was not easy. Someone who would see me as a partner, not a prize. You offered me exactly what I needed." Winter came early that year, but Emma and Phillip were prepared. They had stocked the cabin with food and firewood, and they spent the long, cold months working together to plan their ranch. Emma proved to have a good head for numbers and organization, while Phillip knew everything about cattle and horses and the practical aspects of ranching. They talked for hours by the fire, making lists, sketching out plans, dreaming about the future. Phillip taught Emma about cattle breeding and grazing patterns. Emma taught Phillip about bookkeeping and managing investments. They were learning together, building their partnership day by day. When spring arrived, they were ready. They bought their first herd, 50 head of good cattle and a dozen horses. Samuel Porter helped them find experienced ranch hands willing to work for fair wages and honest treatment. The Double H Ranch began to take shape. Emma discovered she loved ranching. She loved the physical work, the sense of building something real with her own hands. She rode out with the hands during roundup, kept the books in the evening, and helped Phillip make decisions about every aspect of their growing operation. She was not just a rancher's wife. She was a rancher, a full partner in everything they built. The town noticed. Some of the older women clucked their tongues and said it was not proper for a lady to be riding around the range like a cowhand. But most people saw the success of the Double H Ranch and recognized that Emma and Phillip had something special. Mrs. Chen visited often, bringing news from town and supplies they needed. She always stayed for dinner and conversation, and Emma treasured these visits with her friend and former employer. "You made the right choice," Mrs. Chen said one evening as they watched Phillip working with a young horse in the corral. "All those rich men with their big offers, and you chose the one who offered you honesty and partnership. Look how happy you are." Emma smiled. "I knew what I wanted. I just had to wait for someone who wanted the same things." By the end of their first year, the Double H Ranch was profitable. By the end of the second year, it was thriving. Emma and Phillip expanded the herd, improved the buildings, and established a reputation for quality cattle and honest dealing. Emma also discovered she was pregnant in the spring of their second year. She told Phillip one evening after dinner, nervous about how he would react. They had talked about children in abstract terms, but this made it real. Phillip's face went through several emotions in quick succession: surprise, joy, fear, and then a deep, settled happiness. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy about it?" Emma asked. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Phillip said, pulling her into his arms. "Terrified, definitely, but also thrilled. We are going to be parents, Emma." They spent the next months preparing for the baby's arrival. Phillip built a cradle from aspen wood, carefully sanded and polished. Emma sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They argued good-naturedly about names, finally settling on Thomas if it was a boy and Grace if it was a girl. Their son was born in January 1881 during a fierce snowstorm. Mrs. Chen came to help with the birth, staying for 2 weeks afterward to make sure both Emma and the baby were healthy. Thomas Phillip Hayes was a healthy, loud baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Philip held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Emma, we made a person." "We did," Emma agreed, exhausted and exhilarated. "We made a beautiful person. Parenthood was harder than either of them expected and more wonderful." Thomas was a demanding baby, but he was also sweet and curious. Emma loved watching Philip with their son, seeing the gentle patience he brought to fatherhood. Philip would sit for hours with Thomas, talking to him about the ranch, the horses, the mountains visible through the window. "He cannot possibly understand you," Emma said, amused. "He will someday," Philip replied. "I want him to know my voice, to know he is loved and valued." Emma's heart felt so full sometimes she thought it might overflow. As Thomas grew, the ranch continued to prosper. They added more land, more cattle, built a proper barn, and expanded the cabin into a real house with multiple bedrooms and a big kitchen where Emma could cook and bake. They hired a housekeeper, a widow named Martha, who became part of their extended family. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas learned to walk, then to talk, then to ride. Emma and Philip taught him together, sharing the work of parenthood the way they shared everything else. When Thomas was 4, Emma gave birth to their daughter, Sarah. When he was 7, their second son, James, arrived. Through it all, Emma and Philip maintained the partnership that had been the foundation of their marriage. They made decisions together, divided labor according to skill and interest rather than arbitrary gender roles, and talked through every disagreement until they found a solution both could accept. "People still think we are strange," Emma said one evening. They were sitting on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were asleep inside, the ranch was quiet, and Emma felt at peace with the world. "Let them think what they want," Philip said, reaching for her hand. "We know the truth. We built something real and good together." "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked. "Marrying a woman with money, dealing with all the complications that brought." Philip turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of the same steady honesty that had first drawn her to him. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for one single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Emma. You and our children and this life we built together. I would not change any of it." Emma squeezed his hand. "I love you, Phillip Hayes. I loved you from the moment you defended my honor, expecting nothing in return. I loved you more when you offered me honesty instead of empty promises. And I love you still, every day, for being the partner I always dreamed of." "I love you too," Philip said. "More than I can put into words." They sat together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, content in the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely and loved each other without reservation. The Double H Ranch became known throughout Wyoming as a model operation. Other ranchers came to study their methods, to learn how Emma and Philip managed to run such a successful business while maintaining fair treatment of their workers and sustainable grazing practices. Emma began teaching other ranch women about bookkeeping and business management, while Philip mentored young cowboys in horsemanship and cattle handling. They became pillars of the Sheridan community. Emma served on the school board and helped establish a lending library. Philip was elected to the town council and worked to improve roads and water access throughout the area. They used their success not just to enrich themselves, but to help build a better community for everyone. Clayton Morrison eventually left Wyoming, his ranch failing after years of mismanagement and his reputation destroyed by a series of poor business decisions. Emma felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a quiet gratitude that she had trusted her instincts and refused his proposals. Most of her other suitors married eventually, some happily and some not. A few even apologized to Emma years later for their presumptuous proposals, admitting they had been motivated by greed rather than affection. Emma forgave them graciously. She understood that desperation could make people behave badly, and she had learned long ago that holding grudges only poisoned the holder. The years passed quickly, measured in the growth of their children, the expansion of their ranch, and the deepening of their love for each other. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved ranching as much as his parents did. Sarah proved to have a gift for horses and a mind that hungered for education. James was the adventurous one, always exploring, always asking questions. Emma and Philip raised them to value honesty, hard work, and treating all people with respect. They told their children the story of how they met, how Emma had refused all those wealthy suitors because she knew what she really wanted. "What did you want, Mama?" Sarah asked when she was 10 years old. Emma smiled, looking across the dinner table at Philip. "I wanted someone who saw me as a person, not property. Someone who valued my mind and my heart. Someone who would be honest with me, even when honesty was hard. I wanted a true partner in life." "And Papa offered you that?" Sarah asked. "Your father offered me exactly that," Emma confirmed. "He was honest about what he had and what he did not have. He never tried to be anything other than who he was, and who he was turned out to be exactly who I needed." Philip ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. "Your mother made me a better man," he said. "She challenged me to be honest not just with her but with myself. She taught me that real strength is not about pride or pretending you do not need help. It is about being willing to be vulnerable, to be true to yourself and others." As their children grew older, Emma and Philip began to think about legacy and succession. Thomas would eventually take over the ranch, that was clear, but they wanted to make sure all their children had opportunities and resources. They set up trusts for Sarah's education and James's future, whatever that might be. "I do not want them to fight over money when we are gone," Emma said. "I saw what greed did to my father, how it destroyed our family. Our children will inherit equally, and they will know they are all valued." Philip agreed completely. Money should serve family, not divide it. When Emma was 45 and Philip was 46, they celebrated their 20th anniversary with a party that brought together everyone who mattered to them. Mrs. Chen was there, elderly now but still sharp as a tack. Samuel Porter attended with his wife and children. Ranch hands past and present came to pay their respects. The house was full of laughter, music, and love. Standing in the middle of the celebration, watching Philip dance with Sarah while Thomas played fiddle and James tried to teach Mrs. Chen a new step, Emma felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about the young woman she had been, newly wealthy and besieged by suitors who saw only her money. She thought about her stubborn refusal to settle for anything less than what she really wanted. And she thought about Philip, riding into town dusty from the trail, offering her nothing but honesty and winning her completely. "Happy?" Mrs. Chen asked, appearing at Emma's elbow. "Enormously," Emma replied. "How could I not be? I have everything I ever wanted and more than I knew to dream of." Mrs. Chen smiled. "You chose well. You both did." As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Philip found Emma in the kitchen where she was supervising the cleanup. He took the dish towel from her hands and set it aside. "Dance with me," he said. "The music has stopped," Emma pointed out. "Then we will make our own," Philip replied, and he hummed a waltz as he spun her around the kitchen. Emma laughed, feeling young and carefree despite the gray beginning to show in her hair and the fine lines around her eyes. This was what love looked like, she thought. Not the grand gestures or expensive gifts her suitors had promised all those years ago, but this. Dancing in a kitchen with a man who knew all her flaws and loved her anyway, who had been her partner through 2 decades of joys and sorrows, who had never once been anything but honest with her. "I would choose you again," Emma said, interrupting their dance to look up at Philip's face. "If I could go back to that day when you first told me you admired me, knowing everything that would come after, I would choose you again in a heartbeat." Philip stopped humming and held her close. "I would choose you too," he said quietly. "Every time in every life I would choose you." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, holding each other as the house settled into nighttime peace around them. Their children were safe upstairs. Their ranch was thriving. Their love had weathered 20 years and emerged stronger for it. The years that followed brought new challenges and new joys. Sarah went east to college, the first woman in either of their families to receive higher education. She came home with a medical degree and established a practice in Sheridan, serving the community with the same dedication her parents had shown. James became a surveyor, mapping the rapidly changing West and sending long, descriptive letters about his adventures. Thomas married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a smart, capable woman named Alice who reminded Emma of herself at that age. Emma and Philip became grandparents, delighting in the next generation. They slowed down gradually, turning over more and more of the ranch operations to Thomas and Alice, but they never stopped being partners. They still made decisions together, still talked through everything, still valued each other's opinions and insights. On Emma's 50th birthday, Philip gave her a leather-bound journal. "What is this for?" she asked. "I thought you might want to write down our story," Philip said. "For the grandchildren, so they know how it all began." Emma was touched. "That is a lovely idea." She began writing that very evening, sitting at the desk in their bedroom while Philip read beside the fire. She wrote about arriving in Sheridan with nothing but determination, about the inheritance that had complicated her life, about the parade of suitors who had seen her as a prize to be won. And she wrote about Philip, about the quiet cowboy who had defended her honor expecting nothing in return, who had offered her honesty when every other man had offered her pretty lies, who had seen her as a partner when everyone else had seen her as property. "Listen to this," she said, reading aloud from what she had just written. "He had nothing to offer but his honesty, and it turned out that was everything I needed." Philip looked up from his book and smiled. "I like that." "It is the truth," Emma said simply. "You won me completely with your honesty, Philip. You still win me every day with it." Emma and Philip lived long, full lives, seeing their children and grandchildren thrive, watching the West change and modernize around them. The Double H Ranch remained in the family, a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together as true partners. They died within 6 months of each other, Emma first in her sleep at age 73, and Philip following her as his father had followed his mother, simply losing the will to live without his partner beside him. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky as wide and blue as possibility. At Emma's funeral, Sarah read from the journal her mother had written. She read about the inheritance, the proposals, the moment Emma had first really noticed Phillip Hayes. She read about their courtship and marriage, about building the ranch and raising their family, about a partnership based on honesty and mutual respect that had lasted nearly 40 years. "My mother wrote that she had been waiting for someone who would be honest with her," Sarah said, looking out at the gathered mourners. She refused proposals from rich men, powerful men, men who could have given her comfort and status. She refused them all because she knew what she really wanted. She wanted a partner, an equal, someone who would value her for who she was rather than what she had. And when that person came along, a cowboy with nothing but his honesty to offer, she recognized him immediately. She chose love over security, partnership over property, honesty over wealth. And because she had the courage to wait for what she really wanted, she had a life that was richer than any amount of money could have bought. Thomas stood and added his own memory. My father used to say that honesty was the only currency that never lost its value. He said you could lose your money, your land, your possessions, but if you had honesty, you could always rebuild. He and Mother built everything on that foundation. They were honest with each other, with us, with everyone they dealt with. And that honesty created trust, and trust created love, and love created everything else. The grandchildren spoke too, sharing memories of Emma and Philip, of their endless patience, their genuine interest in each person's life, their unwavering support for each other and their family. The portrait that emerged was of two people who had truly seen each other, who had built a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection, who had never stopped being partners even as they aged and slowed. After the service, the family gathered at the ranch house. They looked through Emma's journal together, reading passages aloud, laughing and crying as they relived the story of how Emma and Philip had found each other. They really loved each other, one of the youngest grandchildren said, voice full of wonder. Not just in the beginning, but always. They did, Alice confirmed. She had been married to Thomas for 25 years by then and understood what it took to sustain a real partnership. They chose each other every day. That was their secret. It was not just one big choice on their wedding day. It was 1,000 small choices, every day, to be honest, to be kind, to value each other. As the sun set over the Double H Ranch, the family toasted Emma and Philip's memory. They toasted honesty and partnership, courage and patience, the willingness to wait for real love rather than settling for what was easy or expected. The ranch continued under Thomas and Alice's management, and eventually under their son's management after them. The values Emma and Philip had established, honesty, hard work, fair treatment of all people, became family traditions passed down through generations. The story of how Emma had refused all those proposals from rich men, waiting for the cowboy who offered only honesty, became a family legend. It was told to each new generation as an example of knowing your own worth, of having the courage to wait for what you really wanted, of recognizing real value when it appeared. Emma's journal was preserved and treasured, passed down through the family alongside the ranch itself. Young people reading it decades later could feel the love and respect that had existed between Emma and Philip, could see how honesty had been the foundation of everything they built together. The emerald ring Philip had given Emma when he proposed was passed down too, given to each new bride or groom in the family as a symbol of the kind of love they should aspire to. With it came the story, always the story, of how true wealth was not measured in money or land or possessions, but in honesty, partnership, and love freely given and fully returned. In Sheridan, Wyoming, the Double H Ranch became more than just a successful cattle operation. It became a symbol of what was possible when two people came together as true equals, when honesty triumphed over pretense, when love was chosen deliberately and nurtured carefully. The town remembered Emma and Phillip Hayes not for their wealth or their success, but for the integrity with which they lived their lives and the example they set for others. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew down from the Bighorn Mountains and across the prairie, Some people swore they could still feel the presence of Emma and Phillip on their ranch, walking hand in hand through the land they had loved, their partnership enduring even beyond death, a testament to the power of honesty and the triumph of real love over all lesser things. The legacy they left was not just property or money, though there was enough of both to secure their descendants' futures. Their real legacy was a living example of what marriage could be when both partners came to it as equals, when honesty was valued above all else, when love was built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. Emma had waited for someone who would see her as a person rather than a prize, and she had found him in Phillip Hayes, a cowboy who had nothing to offer but his honesty. That honesty had been worth more than all the wealth and status her other suitors had promised. It had been the foundation of a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed down through generations, inspiring everyone who heard their story to wait for real love, to value honesty, to choose partnership over property, and to never settle for anything less than what their hearts truly wanted.